the floor is yours, Yann.
Thank you, Patrick, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here virtually with you today. I wish I would be there in presence, but we have very strict duty travel rules still at the EPO, and so I appreciate very much that you enabled me to participate nevertheless in this event. I've been listening to the previous sessions. That was very relevant discussion to me on very important questions, and I think that the topic of this session is particularly relevant after the previous discussion. It was touched a bit by Bruno, for instance, in his introductory speech, but there's a lot to say about this. So thank you for having me for that. The topic is very broad, actually, very relevant, and as you said, I can certainly not discuss everything. And I will take the perspective of the EPO, so more from the angle of a patent office, so from the patent angle and from the European angle, based on evidence that we have collected at the EPO in our studies, surveys, case studies over the past years. And I'm sure there's a lot more to say, and that my colleagues in the panel will complement that very well. But there are a few important messages that I'm happy to share at this occasion. And perhaps the first one and the overarching one, I hope you can see my presentation. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Is that I think this is a good question, because I think that very often when people discuss about technology transfers or think of technology transfers, they have this kind of naive view of technology available on the shelf that is there to buy over the counter, and that it's as simply to transfer technology as to buy an apple in the supermarket or whatever consumer good. And that's obviously not the case. And likewise, that it's just about buying IP, buying patents, for instance, or buying access to patents via a license. And likewise, that's not the case. The patents, the licensing are a means to an end, and it's very important to understand the end of and the scope of this end. And it's all about interactions. It's all about trust people, like has been said already today. So let me bring my contribution to that discussion based on the evidence we have. And the first thing I would like to mention is that it's not directly about technology transfers, actually. It's about the role of universities and fundamental research in innovation, and in Europe in particular. As you may know, we regularly publish technology trend studies, I would call them like that, where we take a broad sector and we analyze the patent landscape, and we try to understand the dynamics and the players there. And on this slide, you have one example of a study we published about 6 months ago on the future of plastics, focusing on plastic recycling and bio-based or recyclable plastics. And we use typically a metric, which is international patent families. So we measure, we count international patent families, which is as neutral as possible. And there you have some results that are typical of this. That are from this study, but typical of the other studies that we carry out. We always see the same thing. So let me elaborate a bit. When we look at plastic recycling, we identify different segments of technology. Some of them are relatively low-tech, waste recovery. Or you may have some artificial intelligence here, some robots, but still it's relatively basic. You have then the classical way of recycling plastic, mechanical plastic to product. That's not very good because the quality decreases with the cycles. And then you have the future, which is chemical and biological recycling. There you can get back from the plastic waste to monomer and create virgin quality plastic. This is where a lot of innovation is taking place. And this is where we find the university patents, the patents that are really based on fundamental science. And then if we look at the geographical origin of these university patents, we see that a fair share of them are coming from Europe, actually. So Europe universities, research institutions are very active in that field, on par with the United States and ahead of the rest of the world. And that's what we often see, whatever the kind of technology that we study. But we also see that actually this good performance of European universities in this advanced field is not reflected in the performance of European industry. So actually, in that case, Europe has a larger share of university patents than of industry patents. And another indicator is startups. So if we compare, so university patents are on par with the US, but the startups patents there are much well behind the US startups. And that's very, very often the case, whatever the technology field that we are looking at. In the same study, we looked, for instance, at what's the name of this? Okay, I forgot the name of the type of plastic, but it's a type of new types of plastic that can self-repair, and it was invented in France actually. So the bulk of the university fundamental patents come from France, from ESPCI to be precise. But most of the industry application patents have been filed by Japanese companies. So I could go on with this kind of examples. I think you see the point. The point is that there is a real potential in terms of university research in Europe, university innovation, but it seems that the performance of Europe in transferring this technology to industry is not there, is not sufficient, and that there is potential for doing better, which makes the question of today's event very important to me, to the EPO, and to Europe more generally. So what can we say about then how these transfers work? Well, we have a bit of evidence. It's well known actually, but it's just one way to illustrate what is known already from the surveys that we carry out with our EPO applicants. So one example is there. So we have been surveying European research institutions over Europe, those that were filing patents with us. And one of the questions was the classical one: what are your motives for patenting? And of course, you find technology sale or licensing, so this kind of on-the-shelf idea of technology transfer. But also, very importantly, you find spin-offs, you find contract research or cooperation, and these are other very important channels for technology transfers. In practice, they are not exclusive from licensing, often it's combined. And what do they mean? It means that it's more than an over-the-counter transfer of technology. Technology transfers involves some advanced degree of collaboration with partners, with people based on a technology platform, and the transfer via a license, for instance, is just the outcome of that. It's not the starting point. So it's very important to have this partnership, long-term, dynamic, interactive partnerships dimension in mind to me when discussing technology transfers, especially from universities. Another way to look at it, so from the same survey, and to me that's a striking one. So we asked first to these universities what was the development stage of the inventions that they had patented with us. And you have this on the upper bar, and you see that about a small half is in development stage, another half in implementation or operation stage, and a little bit in the research stage. And then we also asked for the same patented inventions, how did you develop that? And you see that 3/4 of them, although many of them are in the implementation or development stage, are being developed alone by the universities. And then you have a little bit of collaboration, of partnerships in the distribution. And to me, there is a kind of gap there of discrepancy. It suggests that, so it will have to be further explored, but it suggests that the partnerships or the notion of partnerships often comes very late. And so it's important to consider, or to look more closely at what these partnerships are. So we also asked these universities or public research organizations, what kind of partners are they looking for? And I think it's worth showing because, of course, they are looking mainly for corporate partners to commercialize technology, but not necessarily for large companies. So they would preferably actually work with SMEs, including possibly a spin-off in this case. But roughly speaking, you have a about half of the partners that are small businesses and half large businesses. So it's quite diverse. It really reinforces this notion of ecosystem. It's not only partnerships with big companies, although that matters, of course. Another interesting insight is about the location of the research partners or patent commercialization partners of European universities. And there you see that they are mainly looking for partners in their country. So this is an important information to us at the EPO, because we are interested in the pan-European partnerships. But in the case of universities, they are mainly looking for local partners, in fact, and this is confirmed also by various anecdotal evidence. And it's interesting to compare that with the same survey that we carried out with European SMEs that have been filing patents with us. And there the pattern is completely different. Actually, they are looking for partners to commercialize their technology, because usually they don't have all the assets to do that. They may not have the manufacturing assets, the distribution networks. They want to scale up in other countries. And in fact, SMEs are looking for partners in European countries more than in their domestic market. So there is really a contrast. And I think it's this contrast is interesting to understand a bit the process and the challenge of technology transfer and commercialization. In fact, we should not oppose that. It's more like sequential, as I would see it. So universities, research institutions will typically partner long-term, locally on a technology platform with business partners. But at some point, is the technology at some point in time, at some stage, if the technology has to go on and to be commercialized, the next step is to scale up in Europe, in other European countries. But it's another story. And this tells us that when we think about that in terms of partnerships, it reminds us that partners may have common interests, but they also have different objectives, and that all the challenge of these interactions is about accommodating these different objectives and finding a smart way of doing that without harming the interest of one or the other party. And I come back to patents and licensing here. I said it is a means to an end. Precisely, this is where the plasticity of intellectual property and related contracts intervenes in order to adapt a huge variety of situations. And I will conclude there with a few examples. Actually, we have just released a couple of months ago a series of case studies on successful technology transfers from universities across Europe. So the cases are extremely diverse. I just pick a few of them, and I would start with that one. So Atlantic Therapeutics. It's the case of a research collaboration between UCD, so University College in Dublin in Ireland, and a biomedical research company there to develop a technology let's say a health technology. And I think an first important remark is that we have joint ownership here, and I think it is I'm sure all of you who are experienced with the technology transfer are familiar with these issues. So who owns the IP? If you have several owners, it's much more complicated. In France, you oftentimes have a lot of owners with all the CNRS and so on, all the co-partners in the laboratories. That makes it more complicated, and that was the case here. So they had to find a way to commercialize this technology, and the typical answer here was to sign an exclusive field-restricted license. And by using this aspect of the flexibility of patents, it was possible to make sure that biomedical research had the possibility, the exclusivity and the incentives to exploit the technology in its well-defined segmented market, while keeping the possibility for university college to keep exploring the technology for other applications. So that's a very classical pattern, and to me a good illustration of this plasticity of patents and licensing as a means to support a collaboration. My next example is very close. It's a LITOS. It's a spin-off of the Technische Universität of Wien in Austria. And actually, it would be the next stage. So the TU has been approached by Ivoclar, which is a big dental company, to develop for Ivoclar 3D printing technology. So this was commissioned research, and there it was clear that the IP would belong to Ivoclar, but actually the technology was promising, and there was potential for exploiting that technology beyond dental applications, and this is what they did. So here Ivoclar was smart enough to grant, were both partners, but it was accepted by Ivoclar to grant to the university exploitation rights for non-dental applications, which enable the university to spin off various companies, including Litos. And another interesting remark of the synergic benefit is that the patent portfolio was that of Ivoclar, but with a license carved out for Litos, and that's a broad patent portfolio, and that especially at the international level, and that made it much easier for Litos to scale up. And the last, my last example, Oxeon. Bruno mentioned, or several other participants, the notion of being passionate, the enthusiasm, the people. And actually, there was also mention of the professor's privilege. And this is the case of a startup in Sweden, coming from a university professor where there is a professor privilege, so no TTO. And I will not be long on that, but they developed 3D weaving technologies for composite textiles using ceramics and carbon fiber, so advanced materials, with a lot of potential applications. They managed to spin out the technology without a TTO, and the key to that was the enthusiasm of the research team and of the ecosystem of the students, and that reminds us of the key. I think the key condition of a successful technology transfer beyond and before the IP and the licensing and the contracts is that the researchers stay on board, participate, be supportive, and bring in their know-how. The notion of know-how is absolutely fundamental. So I will stop there. Thank you for your attention, and looking forward to the discussion and other presentations.